Welcome back to Serger Tip Clips. Recently in a Serger Facebook group, somebody asked how to shorten the sleeves on a top that has a ribbed cuff on it. And I thought that would make a great topic for a tip clip. And I know myself, when I've bought turtlenecks, if they don't come in a petite, I often have to shorten the sleeves because I'm short. And I thought I would give you a few tips on how to do that, as well as what to think about prior to changing that. So let's talk first about what to do before you actually go to your serger and complete the process. First of all, check the fiber content. If your top is 100% cotton or even 50% cotton, you'll probably want to launder it the exact same way that you plan to do after you've worn it. If you are planning on putting it in the dryer, put it in the dryer, because you want to get out as much shrinkage as you possibly can. And that's really important. And so get that first. Try your top on and mark exactly how much you want to remove in the length of that. After you've determined where you want to shorten the sleeve to, you'll notice that as you move up the sleeve, it widens out a little bit. If you decide you want to taper it in a little bit and get rid of some of that width, now is the time to do it after you remove the cuff from the sleeve itself. A word of caution, though, on tapering it in. If your fabric has little or no stretch, or if it's a woven instead of a knit fabric, be sure not to taper it in so much that it feels snug and uncomfortable on you. So probably basting it in or pinning it in, trying it on again, will be the best guideline for how much to take in on that taper. And again, you'll just follow the underarm long sleeve seam on that and taper that in to be the amount of width that you prefer on you. Let's go over to the table and take a close-up look at how to mark the sleeve length and how to remove the stitching on it. Here's our mock-up sleeve at the original length, and we've determined that we want to remove about 1.5 inches of length from this and then reattach the ribbing. So the first thing I want to do is accurately mark that. So let's take our marking pen, and this is a friction pen that'll erase. So we'll go around. Mark this. I'm a pro at this because I'm short, and even sometimes on tops that are petites, the sleeve can sometimes be a little bit longer than I want. So I've had a lot of practice at this. Okay, that gives me enough information for where I want to move my ribbing to. I've marked the 1.5 inches that I want to remove from the sleeve length, and I'm going to trim this off about 1/4 inch below the marks on the sleeve, because that will give me the seam allowance. Even though 1/4 inch isn't critical, because we can be very exact when we sew our own clothes and we know how to make these alterations, why not make it perfect? There are a couple of ways to remove whatever's left of the sleeve that's attached to your ribbing. You could either chop it off right below the stitching line and lose that 1/4 inch on the ribbing width. Or if you want to maintain that, what you can do is pull on your needle thread. And what I like to do with knits, because sometimes some of them can be a little more fragile than others, is I like to cut a certain amount of it and pull it kind of in sections. And it's the needle thread that you're going to pull, because then that lets the looper threads fall off. So I'll just show you that. So I'm pulling that out, no more needle thread, and then it's very easy to pull off the looper threads. So I just have a little bit more to go, and then we're going to be ready to attach it to our new sleeve length that's marked. Just the way you do when you're attaching elastic using the quartering method, you can do the same thing on the sleeves. Although, because the sleeve is so small, I really think you can be relatively accurate without it. But just in case, I did mark my quarter marks. I used the seam line as one. Here's the other, the third, and the fourth. And you'll do the same thing on your cuff and match up the quartering marks. I'll slip the sleeve inside the ribbing. And what I like to do to eliminate a little bit of bulk is just slightly offset the seam of the cuff from the seam of the sleeve itself. You don't have as big a bump there. So I'm going to put a clip there. And then I'll find my next quarter mark right here. Put that in. And obviously you're working in a very small circumference, so it's a little bit fussy. And while I'm talking about that, on women's long sleeve jerseys, I typically never use the free arm, even though I have it on my serger, simply because I find that if I want a slimmer fit around my wrist or lower arm, then the free arm tends to stretch it a little more than I prefer. So, and I'm going to leave that fourth clip off simply because it's such a short amount of space that I'll just match it up with the quarter mark and I'll be good to go. One other item before we start stitching is that you want to stretch the ribbing just to the width of the circumference of the sleeve. You don't want to overstretch the ribbing and stretch the sleeve with it, because it just won't look as good and you'll have a stretched out edge on your sleeve. So when you're doing this, you want to leave the sleeve fabric pretty much relaxed and just stretch the ribbing to the length in between the quarter points. Let's talk about the settings on the machine. I am set up for a 3-thread wide overlock. All of my tensions on the left overlock needle, upper and lower loopers, are on the default setting of 4. I have my stitch length at 2.5, even though I'm going through 3 layers of knit fabric. I want to build in that little extra stretch of not having a longer stitch length. And I'm leaving my differential feed on 1.0. The stitch width is 6.0, and that will give me a perfect 1/4 inch. And you remember at the table when I mentioned that I was cutting the sleeve length just a 1/4 inch longer than where the marks are. That will handle that perfectly. So let's get going, and let me put my knife up. So I think we're ready to get moving here. And I am going to start right where those 1/4 marks are. Put my presser foot up. And because this is such a tiny circumference, you just kind of have to ease it in under the foot kind of gently. And I'm probably just going to skim off a tiny bit of the edge of the sleeve, not much at all, if anything. And I just go slowly on something like this because, again, I don't want to stretch the white fabric, just the blue ribbing. And I want to make sure my seam allowance flattens out here. Get my clip out of the way. And you're just going to smooth out and turn your fabric around as you go, just to make it easy to get to. And what I like to do also is, as I'm coming up to my beginning stitches, I'm going to cut that thread tail that started my stitching right off, and you'll see how we get a really super nice clean finish. Okay, now my knife is getting very close to those beginning stitches. So what I'm going to do, because I don't like to swerve off my fabric, I just don't like the way that looks. I'm putting my knife down. I'm not going to trim off anything else. I'm going to finish right, just overlap a stitch or two, raise the presser foot, veer off, and now I'm going to chain off, but I'm not on the fabric anymore. And it gives me a super nice clean finish. I'll leave a little thread tail here that I can tuck in, but let's take a look at this. This looks really pretty good. I'm going to go over to the iron, give this a quick press, and then we'll look at it on the table. Here's our cuff attached to our 1.5 inch shorter sleeve length, and it looks great front and back. And here's just that little tiny offset. It's really kind of hard to see. The seam is right in here in the ribs. But again, it reduces the bulk on that seam line, which is great. Let's take a look at this from the inside too. And I did use contrasting thread. I used kind of a rose color in here so that you could see. And I haven't put my thread tails back, and I'll be happy to show you how I did that, because that also makes it nice and neat. I like to use a double-eyed needle when I tuck in the thread tails. The rounded tip eliminates the chance of snagging or breaking the stitches. So I just bring it in, I slide it in for about 1 inch and then pull it along, take my thread tail, and on the opposite end of that double-eyed needle, there's another eye. That's why they call it double eye. And I'm just going to pull this in underneath, give it a snip, and it's a nice clean finish. And you can see that the sleeve is not stretched out here at all. I was careful making sure that I left the white knit fabric relaxed and just stretch the ribbing to match it. So it came out looking really quite good, and I'm very pleased with it. So you can do this at home very easily on garments. And as I said, oftentimes the sleeve lengths are very generous, and I think if you trim them up a little bit, if they're very long, it eliminates kind of a sloppy look on them. Unless, you know, again, it's a matter of wanting to get them to look the way you want it to look. Thanks for joining me today. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. I'll get back to you quickly with an answer. I hope you tune into my Serger Savvy on the second Tuesday of each month at noon Eastern Time. If you can't catch it live, it is automatically recorded to my channel so that you can watch it anytime. I hope you'll hit the subscribe button. Happy sewing and serging.